Okay, so here's something really interesting that's just happened. India's inked this pretty big deal, $7.4 billion with France.
Right, for the Rafale Marine fighter jets,
just
the naval version.
Exactly. 26 of them for the Indian Navy, expected around, what, 2025?
That's the timeline they're aiming for, yeah. And, this comes on top of the ones the Air Force already has.
Right. The IAF operates 36 Rafales already. So, look, if you're maybe gearing up for your UPSC exams or, honestly, just keen to understand India's strategic capabilities, this acquisition is, well, it's a pretty significant piece of the puzzle, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely crucial. It signals a lot.
So today in this deep dive, our mission, let's call it, is to really go beyond those headlines.
Yeah, unpack it a bit.
Exactly. We want to get into why naval aviation, why aircraft carriers, and why these particular jets, the Rafale M, are so vital for India's defense posture.
And we're leaning heavily on that recent Indian Express article for this discussion, correct?
Yeah. We are, yes. It provides a great framework. So think of this as your essential briefing on the strategic thinking involved, defense preparedness.
And how it all fits into India's role, especially in the Indian Ocean.
Precisely. Okay, so where do we start? Maybe the basics. Naval aviation itself.
Good idea. Naval Aviation 101, let's call it. Because it's more than just planes flown by the Navy.
Right.
At its heart, it's about military aircraft used by naval forces. And they operate from all sorts of platforms.
Like carriers, obviously, but also other ships.
Yes, carriers are the most prominent, but also cruisers, destroyers sometimes have helicopter decks, even land bases. It's all geared towards supporting maritime objectives.
So these aren't just standard planes painted gray, are they? They must be pretty specialized.
Hugely specialized. Think about it taking off from a really short runway, sometimes with a ski jump.
And landing, too. Catching that wire on a moving deck.
Exactly. Arrested landings. That requires specific aircraft design, incredibly skilled pilots. And the missions are diverse, too. Air-to-air combat, sure, but also attacking ships, hunting submarines.
Reconnaissance as well, I imagine. Logistics.
Absolutely. Maritime reconnaissance is key, search and rescue, moving supplies and personnel, the whole range of capabilities packed into these naval air arms.
Okay, so what are the main jobs, the core roles that naval aviation performs for a country like India?
Well, the big one is fleet air defense. Protecting our naval forces when they're out at sea, far from friendly land-based air cover. Carrier aircraft provide that crucial air shield.
Makes sense, like a protective bubble.
Kind of, yeah. Then there's strategic power projection. The ability to project air power basically anywhere in the world without needing permission for land bases. That's huge.
Global reach, essentially.
Precisely. Also, anti-surface warfare targeting enemy ships. Support for amphibious warfare helping land troops on hostile shores. And something less known, maybe. Mine countermeasures.
Clearing sea mines.
Yes, using specialized aircraft or helicopters to detect and neutralize mines, keeping sea lanes safe. So overall, it's about controlling the seas, working with other forces.
Joint operations.
Exactly. Joint operations and projecting national power. And the tools for this include, the jets, the patrol aircraft, helicopters, and increasingly drones or unmanned systems.
So it's a complex ecosystem, and you mentioned carriers are sort of the centerpiece for a lot of this, the floating airbase idea.
That's a perfect way to put it. An aircraft carrier is a mobile floating airbase, a warship with that full-length flight deck.
For launch and recovery.
Right. And below deck, you have hangars for storing, maintaining, arming the aircraft. Its whole purpose is seaborne air power projection. It extends a Navy's reach dramatically.
Takes the fight or the presence far from home shores. Now, you often hear about carrier battle groups, not just the carrier itself. What's that about?
Good point. Carriers rarely sail alone. They're usually the heart of a carrier battle group or CBG.
So a whole formation.
Yes. A formation including destroyers, frigates, maybe cruisers, submarines, and supply ships. They all work together.
Protecting the carrier.
Protecting the carrier, yes, but also adding their own offensive and defensive muscle. These CBGs are really central to modern naval strategy. They're powerful tools for deterrence, showing strength.
Establishing control in certain areas.
Sea control, exactly. And achieving air superiority where needed. The real power isn't just the carrier, it's the synergy of the whole group. It's adaptable, it's mobile.
It sounds incredibly flexible. What are the big strategic advantages?
Adaptability is key. They can handle vast ocean areas, strike sea or land targets, operate across different domains, electronic warfare, cyber even.
And they must be tough to take down. Survivability.
Definitely designed with multiple layers of defense. Very survivable assets. Globally, there aren't that many countries that operate carriers. maybe around 50 active ones worldwide,
And the U.S. Navy leads the pack, right?
by far. They have their 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers. But other nations, including the UK, France, China, Russia, and importantly India, operate them too, which shows they're still seen as vital.
Which brings us nicely to India's own carrier story. It goes back a fair bit, doesn't it?
It does. India's journey with carrier aviation really kicked off in 1961. That's when the first INS Vikrant was commissioned.
Wow, 1961. That was quite early on.
It was a big statement back then. And since then, India has been pretty committed to expanding this capability, with a growing focus now on building them ourselves, indigenous development.
So walk us through the key carriers India has operated. The first Vikrant you mentioned.
Right. INS Vikrant, the first one, served from 61 all the way to 1997, laid the foundation.
A long service life.
Indeed. Then came INS Virat, commissioned in 1987, served for nearly 30 years until 2017, another workhorse.
Okay. And currently active.
Currently, we have INS Vikramaditya, which is Russian origin, been in service since 2013.
Right, the modified Kiev-class carrier.
That's the one. And the big milestone recently, of course, was the commissioning of the new INS Vikrant in 2022.
Our first domestically built carrier? That's a huge achievement.
A massive step for indigenous defense capability. It really shows how far India's naval ambitions and shipbuilding have come.
Absolutely. So having these carriers, especially now potentially having two operational carrier groups,
Yeah.
why is this so fundamentally important for India, for our security, our place in the world?
This gets to the core of India's maritime strategy, especially in the Indian Ocean. First, it's about strategic deterrence and power projection.
In our backyard, essentially.
Exactly. The Indian Ocean is vital for our trade, our energy imports, our overall security. Carriers let India project influence, maintain stability, and deter potential adversaries in this critical region.
You mentioned trade. That must be a huge factor.
It is, which leads to the second point, protection of maritime interests. Over 90% of India's trade by volume goes by sea. That's staggering.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah. So securing those sea lines of communication, the SLOCs, is non-negotiable. Carriers help protect these routes, our island territories like Andaman and Nicobar, Lakshadweep, and just generally deter threats to our maritime assets.
Okay, deterrence, protecting trade. What else?
Well, there's the goal of achieving a true blue water navy capability,
Meaning?
meaning the ability to operate effectively far from our own coasts, deep into the oceans, for long periods. Sustain operations far afield. Carriers are essential for that.
So real expeditionary capability.
Right. And having multiple carriers gives you continuous operational readiness. When one is in maintenance or refit, another can be deployed, ideally one for each seaboard, east and west.
Maintaining constant presence.
Exactly. And don't forget the non-military roles. Carriers are incredible assets for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief HADR.
Like after a tsunami or cyclone?
Precisely. They can bring helicopters, medical facilities, supplies, power generation. A huge help in disaster zones. It's also a form of soft power projection.
Okay, so they're very versatile platforms, not just for warfighting.
Not at all. They send multiple messages.
Right. Now, let's bring it back to the Rafale M, the new jets. How do they fit into this picture? How do they specifically enhance our carrier capability?
The Rafale M is a really significant upgrade for our carrier-based fighter fleet. They'll operate alongside the MiG-29Ks we currently use.
Which are also carrier jets.
Yes, Russian origin carrier jets. The Rafale M replaces older generations like the Sea Harriers and goes back further, Seahawks and Aliases. But it also represents a leap forward.
How so? Is it about future plans too?
Well, yes. India is developing its own indigenous carrier fighter, the twin-engine deck-based fighter, or Teddy BF.
Right, I've heard about that project.
But that's still some years away from being operational. The Rafale M bridges that gap perfectly. It brings in really advanced fourth and half generation capabilities now.
What does 4.5 generation mean in practical terms?
It means it's got highly advanced avionics, sensors, data links for network-centric operations, often some stealth characteristics, superior maneuverability. Basically, a generation ahead of many fighters currently in service globally. And, critically, it's combat-ready and proven.
It's seen action elsewhere?
Yes, the Rafale platform has a solid combat record with the French forces and others. So we're not buying an untested system. It delivers high performance right out of the box.
And the fact that the Indian Air Force already flies the land-based Rafale, that must be a big plus.
Oh, absolutely huge. That's the interoperability factor.
Here.
Meaning shared training, maintenance, logistics, spare parts. between the Navy and the Air Force.
So pilots could potentially train on similar systems. Maintenance crews share knowledge.
Exactly. It streamlines everything, saves costs, improves efficiency. It makes joint operations much smoother. It's a major strategic advantage.
I see. So it's not just adding a new plane, it's adding the specific plane that integrates well.
Precisely. So the bottom line is, the Rafale M provides a significant boost to our overall military capability. It really sharpens the teeth of our maritime strike power and enhances readiness across the board.
Okay, let me try and summarize this. So, naval aviation, with aircraft carriers as its most powerful expression, is absolutely fundamental to India's defense strategy, right? Especially for safeguarding our interests in the crucial Indian Ocean region.
And to put it better.
And this deal for the Rafale M jets, it's a major step in modernizing that capability. It gives us a proven, advanced, and importantly, interoperable fighter for our carrier.
Correct. It fills a gap and enhances existing strengths.
And for those of you listening, especially if you're preparing for UPSC, really understanding this connection, naval power, strategic goals like blue water capability, protecting SLOCs, and specific acquisitions like the Rafale M, it's vital. It helps build that comprehensive picture needed for mains answers and even for prelims context.
Definitely. And it leads to a thought, perhaps, for you to consider moving forward. Given how fast technology is changing, drones, AI, hypersonic missiles, what do you think the future of naval aviation, particularly for India, looks like in the long run?
That's a fascinating question. What challenges, what opportunities will shape it? Something to mull over.
Indeed.
So, if you are diving deeper into India's defense policy, maritime security, the Indian Ocean's strategic importance, and we encourage you to do so, keep exploring these themes. Remember, our main source for this discussion was a recent piece in the Indian Express, always worth reading their analysis. And finally, if you found this deep dive useful for your understanding or your prep, please do hit that like button, subscribe to the deep dive, and definitely leave your questions or comments below. We really do want to hear from you.